Hey, Canadian Premier League fantasy fans, or just Canadian Premier League fans in general. It's been a while since we did a video here, all the way back since our culmination of the last fantasy season. But I thought we'd get a couple videos kicked off at the start this time, so we have an idea going in. Fantasy Premier League Canadian Premier League fantasy hasn't said anything about when they're booting things up yet, but this is a video that was supposed to be shown a long time ago. I wanted this to be together with the CONCACAF League results and the Canadian Championship final that was supposed to be against Toronto FC that just never ended up taking place yet. So some of the stuff in this video is going to be a little bit of older news. Anthony Novak makes an appearance, but he's not on the team anymore. But this is strictly to go about Forge and how they're looking this way, because this is the only team we saw past the Canadian Premier League. So just some things that I noticed from them. And I have a guest with me today as well. This is the first time I'm going live on camera, so a couple new things. But welcome, Peter. He also played the game last year. It was his first time playing, I think, fantasy in general, right? Any kind of fantasy football. For me, it was my first time playing the Canadian game, but I had played the English game, which actually went really well this past year, coming in the top 4% of everyone. But yeah, so this video is completely just about Forge and what kind of takes could be made from how they did in the CONCACAF League, so everything past the Island Games. And if you want to help get the season off right and hopefully get the channel bigger and the viewership of Canadian Premier League fantasy tips off and running, if you could either subscribe to the channel or drop a like or take a look at the Instagram page, CanPL Forged and Fire. Should be able to find it there as well, and I'll be posting when I post videos on YouTube and stuff there. Okay, so we're gonna dive right into this, and hopefully it's informative and will help some people out. So one thing that we noticed that you couldn't really notice in the Island Games, but Bobby Smiriotis, coach of Forge, does have somewhat of a preferred starting 11. Obviously in the Island games are like every 2-3 days. You couldn't really see, there's a lot of rotation. So you couldn't really see a definite starting 11. You had Babuli playing sometimes, Novak, even Balbinati got some starts. And I know me and Peter have talked about how he's kind of like the Pep Guardiola of the CPL. So as we saw, and Peter, you can talk to this, you kind of saw like a consistent starting 11 when we saw them play Lemenyo and Toro.
Yep, definitely. We, like Daniel said, we've talked about it many times. Sometimes it's very frustrating. But obviously this, what we can call Bobby ball, where even if you reward your team with a 3-0 win, it doesn't mean your place in the lineup was safe. That kind of went away in the Island Games and then the CONCACAF League, right? We saw that I think Bobby started to realize, especially in those high pressure situations, going to Central America where it's hostile environments, even without fans, the heat, altitude, different things like that. You need to rely on the guys who maybe have been there before or have had similar experiences, right? So even though we know he's not going to be with the team this year in a playing capacity because he's a coach, David Edgar, for example, David Edgar was immensely important for this Forge team in that CONCACAF League run, right? And the partnership he formed with Daniel Crutzen was probably the best center back pair in the whole league, arguably, in the Island Games. And then in the CONCACAF League, they were the heart of the team, right? So certain players stepped up, and obviously Captain Kyle Becker was immovable in that heart of the Forge midfield, right? So certain guys stepped up, and we did start to see more of that Bobby consistency. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's good. And sorry, I probably didn't do the greatest introduction. So while he hasn't necessarily played so much fantasy football, one reason that we're bringing him over here, not only because he's my friend in real life as well, but he has a wealth of just Canadian soccer knowledge in general, beyond even the Premier League, players coming up from other leagues. So one of the things in my very first videos I mentioned is I'm just going based on what analysts have said. I don't know about these young players coming up. Well, Peter's generally the guy that does know and will tell me players I've never even heard of.
Yeah.
And, in his screening that he used last year was Forza Forge, because we are both Italian ourselves. So if you want to also track his progress as the season goes through, you're looking for Forza Forge, hopefully near the top of the leaderboards.
Yeah, so definitely. Thank you for that, Daniel. Yeah, this is why, when Daniel asked me to join, I was thrilled to do it, because I think it's going to work well. Like Daniel said, he's got a wealth of experience with just fantasy in general, let alone fantasy football. I've traditionally just played more of the fantasy hockey game. But CPL fantasy last year was my first real go at it. And I really, really enjoyed it. I asked Daniel for some tips some way through and kind of just, tinker with the lineup. I didn't do as well as him, but this year, yeah, you can track both of our progress. And like he said, hopefully what I can bring to this is the footballing kind of background, maybe, that might be contributing to the decisions that are kind of going on the field. And then what's really important to recognize, and many of you who have fantasy experience probably know, and you can leave a comment in the chat if you relate to any of this or not, but sometimes on-field football experience doesn't relate to fantasy experience, right? So that's where Daniel can come in. He can translate this football experience I might bring to it and kind of tell you, well, you can take this from the field and apply it to your fantasy lineup. So that's kind of, hopefully we can balance each other and help you there.
So moving on, we're going to go up the lineup, starting in goal. And so I know our chat heads might be covering some of the wording, so I don't know if I drag it, if that will help throughout the video. But the first one, it's kind of an obvious one. Henry, as far as we know right now, with no new keeper signings, I don't think, has the #1 keeping job. We know that they have a backup keeper who made an appearance last year, which was Bajman, and really he only played because Forge was backs against the wall for U21 minutes that they needed. Otherwise, he played all of the CONCACAF League games. But with a 28-game season, they should have lots of time to play their young players and meet any quotas. The only thing that we saw in the CONCACAF League, and we have seen it before in the Canadian Premier League, is that he can cost a team. We saw it in the game against Arkai. There was no reason. Well, I think everyone would agree Forge going forward should have contributed more as well to the cause. Arkai had no business scoring if it wasn't for a disaster error by Henry, and we have seen similar situations like that in Premier League as well. So I know, just talking to you, we couldn't believe what had happened. Is there anything else that you could speak to towards that?
Oh, I don't want to remember that day against Arkai. If only he had just passed it away. But yeah, like you said, it is, if for those who also follow the Canadian men's national team, he's very much akin to Milan Borjan in the sense that great keepers, a lot of pedigree for the level that they're at, but they are prone to those mistakes. I believe one of the mistakes that you might be referencing, Daniel, which we were actually there live, was at Tim Hortons Field in the Canadian Championship against Cavalry the first year.
Palmed into the net, I think, or something.
That's right, yeah. So, and again, such a solid game. He'll come up with a big save, but then he just, for whatever reason, might lose his cool. Not to say he's not the keeper to go with, right? He's very, very reliable for the most part. Bobby obviously trusts him. In terms of Bajman, he has officially been re-signed for the next season. So that is the pairing. And like you said, the minutes were a bigger deal with the island games. Obviously, it hasn't been officially announced, but if you go by insider Sergio Camargo, later this June, we're going to be in Winnipeg for a 28-game season that's going to start in Winnipeg and then move home to the home stadiums, apparently. We'll wait for that to be confirmed by the league. But when that happens, like you said, I think the U21 minutes will be better able to be spread around to the other young players where you can actually get the minutes on the field. Bajman is going to play. He came up through the Sigma Academy, which Bobby and his brother obviously helped found and run. So he's going to get some starts because you do want a young keeper to get some experience, but realistically, Henry will probably carry most of the workload.
And one other thing from the fantasy perspective as well is we know that Forge are going to be good no matter what. They might not win the league again, but they will be one of the stronger teams. But because they're one of the stronger teams, they're probably going to be scoring more goals, and therefore you want a lot more of their attacking options. Knowing that Forge is one of the better teams, has a better chance of maybe keeping a clean sheet, Henry will be priced higher compared to some of the goalies that you might find on Atletico Ottawa, on Edmonton, or something like that. So just something to keep in mind while you might be able to rely on a clean sheet a little better by picking a Hamilton goalie like Henry. It might not be where you want to put the majority of your money in the long run. Okay. And so now there are center backs. And as you can see, an old player, now coach, features here as well, because back when I actually made this, originally I actually filmed it once and then was waiting to see the Canadian Championship happen. And then time just went by, but I did want to end up getting this up eventually. But the center back position is now up for grabs. Nothing really changed for the Island games. This was actually the one position that seemed pretty consistent throughout the entire Island games. You had Edgar and Crutzen mostly in there all the time. Sometimes you saw Samuel join in. But these two are locks. Crutzen was almost as like he was scoring goals as well. He takes set pieces. As we saw, he took the penalty against Toro that ended up winning Forge that game. And so with points, you get more points for a goal for a defender, and a reliable team for clean sheets most of the time. I think that Crutzen will be one of the first names on my team coming up. And then a little thing to add on here is kind of like how Sabak was supposed to be the fill-in for Borges when he left for Belgium. Forge has already announced the signing of Djakovic, and he's also a former Canadian national team player, just like Edgar was. And he is basically said to be the fill-in for him. So it's just, if you thought maybe before this Edgar was going to be in your team, well, it's basically the same thing, putting Djakovic in, I'd say. He might miss a couple games at the start just because he's a new player coming in. But I could see that just being a similar option, a less attacking center back that's more goals to stop the goals coming in rather than contribute to the attack. Can you see anyone else taking any of these spots more dominantly, or do you think that these are the two to go to if you're looking for Forge defense?
So definitely, like you said, and you know, when you look at some other of the experts around the league and around the game, I could speak to the CPL podcast, Charlie O'Connor Clark and Marty Thompson. They said the exact same thing. When you were thinking of a replacement for David Edgar, all of the traits exactly, it's like you just replicated David Edgar come through Djakovic, minus obviously some of the heights he reached, but still, they're very, very similar players. There's no reason to not expect, especially with Djakovic. Some people don't realize he is 34, turning 35 this year, I believe, if he hasn't turned 35 already. But he just last year played in a CONCACAF Champions League final with LAFC, and he actually came on the field. So he's just recently removed from a very high level, coming straight into this Forge team. There's no reason to believe he can't pair well with Daniel Crutzen, just exactly like Edgar did. They built up that balance. And it seems like that's the pair that Bobby will probably rely on with Djakovic coming in. Now, to your question, that doesn't mean that we might not see some rotation, especially in a longer season than last year. When we talk about the fullbacks, it'll be interesting to bring this whole Forge backline into perspective, because this Forge backline probably of some of the CPL teams is the most offensively inclined and has the most rotation around the pitch. And we'll talk about that a little bit after. But with that being said, one of the rotational pieces is Dominic Samuel. It's been proven that Bobby really trusts him, and he tries to get him in his lineup every way he can. Obviously, he played him as a right back last year for a lot of the season. I'm not sure if that's going to come into fruition again. We'll talk about that when we get to the fullbacks. But if you were to need to rest Djakovic at his age, or Crutzen picks up a knock or anything like that, Samuel is the obvious replacement, and he's a suitable replacement for sure. So I would say that's the natural option there.
Cool. So like you said, we're getting right into the wingbacks now, which is why he didn't spoil it before.
Mm-hmm.
But what we saw last year, I don't think we've made any new signings at fullback yet. But the wingbacks have a lot of wiggle room. You could see, I think, a lot of rotation here. And some of these points that I brought up is just based on what I chose to do last year. Grant, I pulled in right from the start. He got injured first game, and that is not his first injury. He seems like a very injury-prone player that, yes, he sometimes gets a little more forward. And when you're picking defense for your fantasy team, you want attacking defenders. Yes, you want to get that clean sheet. That's mostly where your defender points are going to come from. But if you have one that's going to play higher up the field, more like a midfielder, that's who you're going for. That's what my thought process was originally picking Grant last year, and that failed me miserably, and he was out by the end of the first week. So I'm going to probably be staying away from Grant unless his value is way down. But that's one to stay away from. One that I was really looking forward to last year and just didn't really play the role that I was wanting to. Not necessarily that he didn't play the role within the team in real life, but he didn't play the fantasy role that I wanted to, was Maxime Tissot. He'll be back again. I don't even know if he'll be listed as a defender this year, because year to year, a fantasy league will change based on what they saw from the player. So if Canadian Premier League fantasy doesn't see Tissot as a defender anymore, they might move him up the field, just because mostly he came on as like a left winger. He did play the left back role a couple times, but he normally came on as a left winger. But the main thing there is he normally came on as a substitute. He wasn't starting a lot of games. And when you're not starting, you're not able to get that clean sheet. So you're at that point relying on attacking returns being goals and assists there. So, and he was an expensive option to get last year as well. He was max priced at the start of the season. So I might be staying away from that option as well. But if you're looking, and if his price comes down, you're looking for a good player that will sub in and probably contribute, Tissot would still be a decent option. Awua, he was just great last year. Fantasy, I think if I'm picking a midfielder, a wing back, I'd say Awua is going to be the first one that comes to mind. And then finally, Samuel, I think just if I'm going to pick him, I feel like even when he played on the wing, he still acted like a center back. He stayed back more. His role is a lot more defensive. So if I'm thinking Samuel, I might as well just think Jakovic or Krutzen at that point. So that's where my thinking is from those four. Do you have anything to add on to those players?
Yeah, definitely. The graphic you have on the screen there is perfect for this, because realistically, these players, the way Bobby employs them, they play anywhere up, down, left, right on the pitch, realistically. This is what we talked about in terms of fantasy value. One thing that translates well, as you said, so valuable. Defenders who get forward and are attack-minded, right? That is the nature of how Bobby employs his wingbacks, minus Samuel, which we'll talk about again quickly. Kwame Awua, a lot of people forget, when he signed for this team almost 3 years ago now, he came straight from an NYCFC team where he was playing in the midfield with Andrea Pirlo and Frank Lampard. He's talked about this in recent interviews and stuff, how much he learned. He's a very offensive-minded player. He was a midfielder. And Bobby kind of took him and molded him, because for a central midfielder, he's great on the ball. He has pace. He can whip a ball in with good precision. That's everything you want in a left back. And he's transitioned well. We have seen it in the past, definitely in the first CPL season, not as much last year because it was condensed. But when there's times throughout the season that Bobby has injuries in the midfield, he is not afraid to pull Kwame Awua into that midfield role. So as you said, you could have a defender listed player who, from a fantasy perspective, gets pulled suddenly not only into a starting role, but into a starting midfield role higher up on the field, right? So that's huge. Johnny Grant, same thing. Daniel and I have remarked last year many times, there's games where Johnny Grant's starting left wing, he's starting right mid, he's starting right back, and then sometimes he's injured. So when he's healthy, he is very talented, and Bobby does like to employ him everywhere up the field. He does have great offensive ability, so I would look to him as well as someone who gets rotated around. Tissot, too, is a very funny case, because he comes to the league. He's sort of the opposite of Awua. He came into the league when we all thought it was a great signing, experience with the Montreal Impact, Ottawa Fury at USL level, where he was primarily a left wing, left back. There were times last year for Bobby where he was playing center defensive mid. I think when he scored that goal in the final of the Islands game off from almost half that Oxter bumbled, I think he was playing center mid when he scored that. So again, like you said, it all comes to what he's listed as. If he's listed as a left back, then he's a value signing for sure. Obviously, we'll see what his price fluctuates. Hopefully goes down a little bit because he wasn't a consistent starter. And then he might be a steal for you. And then, like we said, Samuel, he's a value option in terms of a depth defensive piece, but he's not going to get forward as much as we kind of expect. I don't know necessarily. Looking at the Forge roster, we kind of mentioned, we'll mention signings throughout the show, the episode. They only have 17 players signed, and if I believe the roster is 23 players, that leaves 5 positions. The obvious glaring one, which we'll touch on, is further up the field that they need. If they were to bring in another fullback, one they had last year, I believe, was Dunstan. He played there for a little while. I'm not sure if they're going to bring him back. But I think it would be a signing there, like a younger kind of fullback to just take some minutes from these guys if they were injured or just throughout the season. I don't see any other really big fullback coming in necessarily right now.
All right, and here's one, and I can see him being in my squad. Kyle Becker, he plays every single game. It doesn't really matter where on the field he's playing, and it's always in the central mid, but he's generally actually playing deeper than you'd normally want your midfielder to play, and he still finds ways to get points. And at that point, when you see that happening game in, game out, even though it goes against the logic of what I'd pick for a player, if he's just doing it consistently and just finding a way, I'm probably just going to set him and let him do his thing. And then if he continues to either let down or something, well, then you got to change it. But even playing in a more defensive role, he was still making returns for me. But he will be probably tied with the most expensive player. Do you think his age will be slowing him down at all, or do you see him having another big contribution to the season?
I think with a player like Becker and his quality in a league like this, he's just too invaluable. I don't think he's going to slow down. He was being linked at the end of last season to a move back to MLS. Like apparently there was real interest there, Vancouver Whitecaps, right? So there's a lot of quality still there. And when you hear him, he does so many interviews around the CPL constantly. And when you hear him speak, he always just has this passion and drive, and he really wants to lead this team to keep being better. I think it really stung the whole team, but especially him, to not get that CONCACAF league last year. And I think that's something that he's going to be pushing the lads to go for this year. And like you said, he's always on the field. Bobby obviously trusts him, and he always finds a way. He always finds a way to be involved in the play, even snag a few goals throughout the season. And you know, his value is deservingly high, especially 2020 CPL MVP, right? So it makes sense.
Yeah, you could just see the anger that he wasn't getting when he took that red card at the end of the game against Marathon, I think it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's there showing in the side every single game, whether it's Island Games or CONCACAF League. And he's really leading the boys out there. So a lot of people see him as a leader and want to get him the ball because of that, because he knows where to put the ball next.
Yep.
All right, now this one's going to be a little interesting, especially because we do have a new/old signing to throw in here as well. But probably where we've seen the most rotation from Bobby Smiriotis is in his wingers, because normally he's just using the one striker. And so in the Island Games, we saw 2 every game. Them just get rotated. You score, you don't score, doesn't matter. 2 in, 2 out all the time. But one of the wingers that really stood out was Choinière, and he also was very dangerous in the CONCACAF League as well, except once we got to the CONCACAF League, where you had like a month between games, Choinière was in there every single time, and then potentially got subbed out towards the end of the game. But that other midfielder, whether it was Nanko or Cadell Thomas or something like that, I'm actually going to let Peter speak more to those players, because I don't really know all of their statuses completely. But another thing to keep in mind now is, with Borges coming back, does that take time away from either Choinière or one of the other players? Because he's coming from sitting on the bench for a full season. He's not coming back to Hamilton to sit on any more benches. So we know that Borges will be in there. So again, that'll be another very pricey pick if you want to put Borges in. But I think you can rely on at least minutes if you are going to go that route. And I just put as the last thing there, just because, like I said, we don't really know what's going on with them. But even when they did play, they had some contributions, but not that much to stay away from Cadell, Nanko, and if Zajac, who I think is over in Poland playing in some men's league or something, has fell out of favor, because Choinière just took that primary winger spot, and then we'll see what happens with the other one. But you can speak to maybe a second winger that'll complement Borges, or if you think Choinière will and Borges will just stay together the entire time.
Yep, definitely. I think if anyone, which I think most people across the CPL, Forge fan or not, watched that CONCACAF League run last year, David Choinière definitely solidified his place in this lineup. Putting him out, whether on the right or the left, depending if you want him to cut in or drive the wing and send balls in, he was just relentless. He showed his skill. He showed that level. He came down from an MLS level. Let's not forget that. Okay, he was playing with the Impact for a while, and limited minutes, but he still has that quality, that pedigree. He was in contention for this past Canadian under-23 Olympic qualifying team. He was on that short list before he got cut from the team, the final team, but he was recognized for his talents. Okay, he's still relatively young, 23, turning 24, I believe, and he definitely is poised for another big season. Honestly, if it were me, looking at how the CPL has been kind of scouted much more now, and hearing his name mentioned with bigger players and bigger teams, I could see him after another big season being a target for a team in another league, because he's just really solidified. And obviously, Borges, what can you say? You're bringing back the 2019 league MVP, okay? He's technically Forge's all-time leading scorer still, I believe, with 13 goals. I don't think anyone's surpassed that yet, at least not in league play. And he's going to come right into the team. You know he's a Bobby guy. Bobby got the most out of him in that first season. We saw him many times in person at Tim Hortons Field, and you can just see his quality on there. Forge will typically stick to that 4-3-3 formation. So you know you're going to have one starting center forward, striker up top, and you're going to have the two wingers. If it's Choinière and Borges, I think that is a safe bet. In terms of the rest, well, actually, before I continue with that, Borges, another thing we can't discredit, he's only on loan from his Belgian Pro League team, OH Leuven, right? He definitely has one eye and one foot in the door on Europe still. He didn't come back here to be a CPL player for the rest of his life. You know he has the quality to go back there and to get back on the men's national team, right? So I think he's going to come out and be motivated, and he'll be out there every single day to try to get back to Europe, and it could happen. With the other players that you mentioned at the bottom quickly, like we said, 17 players signed. I think there's 5 roster spots left. There's one glaring one at center forward, which we're going to talk about that need eventually. But I think Nanko has been re-signed. He's in the 17. Okay. He's the kind of guy, he's a Bobby guy as well. Sigma came through the system. He, at the end of the island games, at the end of the inaugural season, he was phenomenal for Forge in that run to the championship. Very, very, very good player. The island games and the CONCACAF League run weren't the best for him. I think they're going to give him one more shot, see if he can prove what he had from that first year, and that'll remain to be seen. He'll probably be an option off the bench at least to start, and we'll see where he goes. Cadell Thomas hasn't been re-signed yet. Again, Forge has been historically very slow to announce signings. I'm not sure why, just what they do. So part of me would lean more towards him not being back with the team and being with another CPL team potentially. But obviously that's not out of the question. Zajac, as Daniel mentioned, he is, last we checked, if our information is correct, he was playing in a 5th tier Polish side. Okay, so I don't know what that equates to in terms of Canadian soccer. It could be a men's league. I don't know. But
I think we play 5th division Canadian soccer in some respects.
And we're not, and you know what? We're not knocking him. He's playing the game. We're not, right? We're in lockdown still. So good for him. But it does not seem like, if I were to make an educated guess, that he will be back. So with that being said, if right now we only stand at Choinière, Borges, and Nanko, I have a feeling if Cadell Thomas isn't coming back, the Forge will make another winger signing. The salary cap for this season is set somewhere between 650 and 850,000 on players. Okay. The salary cap also, there's a part for coaches and staff, but we're not including that. So 650 to 850,000 in players. The highest earning players make around 77,000. So if you consider that Forge has Borges, Becker, Jakovic, Babuli. Those are probably guys who are up near that 77,000 range, right? So can they come in if they also need a big striker maybe and fill in with a top tier winger? I don't know. They might get another young player signing to fill that in. They had a Cella last year, but I don't think he's re-signed. So as of now, so I'm not sure if he'll be back. So we'll wait to see if they make a signing there. I would say one thing that's been floated around the Canada Soccer message boards and rumor mill. Don't discredit down the line, maybe not this season, but going forward. David Schweinier's younger brother, Matthew Schweinier, a couple years younger, plays for Montreal Impact. He's also a winger. It doesn't seem like he's doing, he's really getting a full chance there at the Impact. Wilfred Nancy's giving him a shot. He's not really getting anywhere. I could see him maybe one day being an option for Forge, joining his brother. It just seems like a natural fit. It's been talked about. We'll see if that happens down the line, but not in the near future, I don't think.
Okay, and so we talked about Becker already and how he just gets in the lineup no matter what every game, but it's a three-person midfield, sometimes like an attacking mid, defending mid, and this spot is normally taken up between Sabak and Cisse normally. And so and could disagree, and this could not be the reason as well, but just kind of what I saw during both the Island games, but predominantly in the CONCACAF League, is that Sabak seems to be more of an option when Forge is trying to play on the attack more, whereas Cisse is more there as a fifth almost defender to help control that center defensive mid area. And so just like I have there, like against Lemenio, we were the stronger team. Like we were the projected favorite going into it, despite being outside of Canada. Lemenio wasn't really highly touted. A lot of people only knew about their icon and that, or their logo, and that was it, the pig logo, which was fun. But that's why we saw Sabak come in. We were much the better team throughout the majority of that game and went on to win expectedly. Against Toro, now this was a team that I think a lot of Forge fans were worried about potentially not winning. Like a lot of people would have thought, well, if we lost to them, at least we're losing to one of the top teams in all of CONCACAF, never mind just Canada or America or something like that. So I think we went into that game a little more defensively minded, and Cisse started that one, and we did play a little more defensively while still playing a great game and scoring a goal in the game. I think Toro had more possession in that game, and so we saw Cisse come into that. So where this plays into now a CPL fantasy season is Forge is always considered to be one of the favorites for the past 3 years. So if we're one of the favorites and we're probably going to be attacking a lot of the games rather than trying to hold off and defending, I imagine that we'll be seeing more of Sabak than compared to Cisse. Or again, we'd have to wait for some other signing that could potentially happen down the road. But as Pierre touched on, we have a lot of big players that we've had to splash money around for. So I can't see another, maybe, but I can't see another big starting player coming into the squad at any time. But a good thing about Cisse is he can also take a wing position sometimes too. We'll just have to see. But that's, I guess, my analysis of that. Do you see a similar pattern, or do you see these two players fitting in differently?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that analysis. Cisse is definitely the Swiss Army knife of the team. Like similar to some of the wingbacks, but he can fit anywhere in that midfield three. Obviously, typically how Forge plays is Achinoti Janssen at the base of a three-man midfield, right? And you would have Becker, and like you said, in a more attacking, put the foot to the pedal on the team kind of formation, you have Sabak in there. But Cisse can come in anywhere in that midfield three. He can replace a winger in a game where we really need to just wear a team down. He's a tireless runner. Very just a useful player to have, and another Bobby guy. Bobby really trusts him even since the first season. There were times in the first season where we didn't really know much about Cisse, and I remember I would see him and like I wasn't too sure what he was, but he's really won us over. He's a good player to have off the bench. Sabak, like you said, I think what hurt our perception of him was the shortened island games. And the fact, like you said, in CONCACAF League, many of the games, the legs and the ties we played, we were the quote-unquote underdog, right? We were playing some big teams, Tauro, Marathon, right? Other than Lemenio, okay? their jersey was better than ours, but can't get better than the pig. But Sabak, I think, was brought in with the quality pedigree he has to really cause CPL defenses problems. A league where it's gotten much better. Okay, there's still some quality, but I think he can take advantage of some young players. He'll have some more space against certain teams, the way they play, and he'll be a regular, I think, in Bobby's lineup and a good fantasy value as well. And like you said, just quickly to touch on that, I don't see a big name central midfield player coming in. I would probably put more credence on a bigger winger player maybe than a bigger center mid player if there was a big player coming in one of those two positions. But yeah, a depth option for sure. They might bring a young player in to kind of help him through, but I don't see that. Nothing big in that front.
Mm-hmm. And another thing from the fantasy lens to look at is now, I think it's going to change this year just because there's a couple different names that I'm going to throw out here. But towards the start of the Island Games, he came onto the team and immediately was on penalty duty, which penalty goals count the same amount as any other goals. So if you have a player and they take the penalties on that team, that's a big bonus. We saw all of the goals by Mavilla from Cavalry as a defender taking penalties. That was huge last year if you owned him. And players from other teams, if they are on that penalty duty, then that is important. However, we did see in the CONCACAF League that Crutzen took the penalty against Toro. And we know that from season 1, Borges was our penalty taker. So it's kind of hard to judge based on that. Some people might be thinking Sabak based on that reason. That reason may be out the window, but I think if you're trying to pick the Forge penalty taker, because we're going to be attacking a lot in the other team's end, you might need to watch some of the games before you can actually make the decision on who's going to be having that duty.
I would just jump in quickly. Same thing with set pieces, right? We remember Borges in the first year would take them, and last year Crutzen was jumping in on that, right? So I think Sabak got in on a few of them, but again, same thing. I don't think you'll have to wait and see.
And sure. You have Becker in there too that took some. So as far as set pieces right now, it's hard to gauge who's going to be taking them for Forge. Yeah. All right, and so I was used to have this slide compared to Novak. He has gone to Cavalry. And so he's kind of a non-option now as far as looking at Forge players, which literally just kind of leaves us with Babuli right now. He's our lone high striker that is still on the team, aside from Balbinati, which somehow found a couple games even in a row in the Island Games. But I think in a serious season where you're playing 28 games and it's just a table, every game is going to matter. Every 3 points is going to matter. You don't want to just be chancing people. It's not like there's ever going to be unless you've already clinched the title itself, there's not going to be any clinching of a group stage, and then you can use your rotation players more. So I think we'll be seeing a lot of Babuli, except we are expecting some kind of striker signing eventually of some sort, and not just a Mickey Mouse player to fill a hole kind of thing. But we saw Babuli, he played in each of the CONCACAF League game, unless Novak was playing as well. Novak played a big role in the CONCACAF League, but again, with him being absent, that really just gives us one option, and there's not too much more to talk to with him being the only option. What do you see a player with a higher caliber than Babuli being brought in that'll take a starting position, or will be someone that more complements him?
So I really think Bobby's going to look for a signing here. I think Forge is going to try and bring in a big player, big for the CPL level, obviously. But I think he's going to try and find someone who he can employ like he did with Babuli and Novak, someone who plays a little differently. Babuli isn't your traditional center forward. He kind of plays between the lines. He's kind of like a false nine. He comes back, drops into the play, plays in between the lines, picks up the ball. He almost creates as much as he scores, right? The other thing a lot of analysts noted, like on One Soccer, and even we noted last year, the CONCACAF League run, every single game he played, the more games he got with Forge, he got more ingrained in the system. He got better and better and better and more effective. I think he's going to continue that. He's going to be super important. Especially if we do ever play this Canadian Championship, I think he'll be very, very integral against TFC, and he'll be fired up for that game. In terms of signings to bring in, like I said, I think Forge has to bring in another striker. And when you look back at the history of this team, the short history, they've had some quality strikers. people are quick to forget because he had a short run here. Emery Welshman was a quality striker. He went straight from the CPL to the Israeli top division, which isn't a league to really sneeze at, especially from at that time, a brand new league that was only like 3 months old. He scored a wonder goal. We were at the one game where he spun around and finished that one. So they had him. Novak turned out to be a very, very good player. He spent this last winter out on loan in the third division of Portugal, and he came back to Cavalry. He's going to get a lot of boos if he ever goes back to Tim Hortons Field, but a very effective player. Really established himself in that 2020 season and the run. Just some names I threw out there just from just piecing things together. No real concrete rumors necessarily. The one name I think Forge should go for, they have that connection with the Impact in the past, signing Schweinier. I think if they can, Anthony Jackson-Hamel would be a great signing. Young Canadian men's national team player, just left the Impact, free agent. He's really in a situation where I don't know how much MLS interest he'll have. There is always the option like Jordan Hamilton took to go to USL and maybe get paid a little more. But if he wants to be closer to home, if he wants to pave his way in Canada, if he wants to play for a team that can offer something USL teams can, and that's CONCACAF football, I think this would be a perfect fit. And I think Forge can fit him in. He'd be a good option. The other option I was thinking of, this came up recently. I know I brought this up to you. It might be tough to fit in because there'd have to be some contract reworking. But just the other day, the Vancouver Whitecaps made a trade for Brian White, who's an MLS kind of veteran striker, which he was coming in to replace Lucas Cavallini, who will be on Gold Cup duty in July. And under him is Theo Bair, who they haven't given up on yet. I think the third person pushed down that list at Vancouver is Tosaint Ricketts. I really, really think at this point in his career, this age, he still would be a very effective player. In the CPL, he would be a phenomenal player. I think Tosaint Ricketts would consider a move to the CPL just to play regular football. He's been paid before, especially recently in his MLS days. I think he's been paid very well. At TFC, he had a pretty decent contract. So I really, really think if somehow they could rework a contract to bring him down from those MLS wages, or get him released so he could sign a new contract with Forge, he'd be another interesting pick that I would hope they would go for. And he would provide tremendous value, tremendous pace, experience, something kind of like Jakovic brings, but at the front of the pitch. So those would be two names to keep an eye on. And just on one quick note, in terms of Balbinati, he hasn't been re-signed officially. But that is someone who I totally expect them to re-sign. Young player, they kind of brought him in the system already. He's not going to command any salary that's too expensive. And you might as well have that young striker who, if you really were impressed with him, which it seems like Bobby somewhat was, he would play him in big moments. Then you might as well bring him back. And he's ingrained in the culture. You give him some more minutes this year, see if he can prove something. I expect him to be back. Yeah.
Especially you're already playing 2 games a week, it sounds like. And we know that we are already in the CONCACAF League again this upcoming year. So who knows how those games are going to be sprinkled in. Yeah. So you cannot expect Babuli to play all 28 plus CONCACAF League games at the end of the day. So something has to happen up front, unless you're going to be shifting around your wingers and letting some of them take over part of the striking duties. Mm-hmm. Okay, so just a couple of subs that you can expect. Just thought I'd go over this in case there's a value option on the bench that you know they probably won't start but might get some minutes. And so Bobby did make consistent subs for the most part. Normally, a Babuli sub at some point in the game was happening for Novak. Now that he's not there, who knows if he might get 90 minutes sometimes, but like I just said, he probably will not play 90 minutes for 28 games. Tissot was unfortunately not starting a lot of the games last year, but he was coming in off on the left side normally, either in a winger position or defense. And we'll see if he starts this year, but if he doesn't, I'd expect more of the same. I don't think he's a player that'll sit for 90 minutes, but I do see him coming in to those positions again. If these two, so Peter already spoke to Nanko is re-signed. If Cadell is re-signed as well, these are normally our players that are coming in on the wings. So I expect Schweinier to get more than half of the starts at least. And these are the players that are normally coming in for him. And Sabak and Cisse kind of went in and out for each other a lot. Now, this is where a lot of the value was for the defense, is because Edgar and Crutzen did not get subbed out. They were normally in for the full 90 every game. So expect Krutzen and Jakovic, barring some defensive signings, likely also getting similar time. And
yep.
I don't know. Yeah, pretty accurate for the most part, I'd say. You know?
Yeah, straightforward. I think in terms of both real footballing tactics and fantasy, like Tisso's going to come off the bench almost every game. Bobby seemed to do that regularly. Yep, he's always replacing his wingers. Even Borges doesn't go full 90s all the time, from what we recall. But Booley, I would just say keep an eye on if they've made that striker signing before the start of the season. If they start the season without another big name striker, I think he could go full 90 and do that. Otherwise, everything else is, pretty spot on. Sabak, Cisse, pretty regular sub guys. And your center back pairs, barring any real injury to Jakovic or anything like that, I think him and Kreutzer are going to do the exact same thing as you mentioned, go full 90 and be very reliable.
And I don't know if it hasn't been said yet whether we're having 3 or 5 substitutions this season.
I don't think that's been declared yet. That's very interesting. My guess, considering we are in North America, fall MLS, Liga MX are doing it, CONCACAF Nations League, CONCACAF League, CONCACAF Champions League, I think there'll be 5 subs.
Okay, just because that also plays a big part into the fantasy part. Sometimes if your player doesn't start, you almost hope that they don't play at all if you have them in your starting 11, because you don't want that player to just come in for 1 point and then now you don't get one of your bench players subbing in for him. So I actually find 5 substitutions makes the game more difficult, because most of your players that you pick for your lineup are going to play at some point during the game, just because 5 new players come into the game rather than 3. So that's just something to know. And now I think this is the final slide. I forget if not. But players to avoid for the fantasy, I would avoid Mon. The only situation that I would suggest having him in is if you take Henry as well. If you take Henry as well, by having Man, you guarantee a keeper for Forge playing every week. There is the possibility that, let's just say, you have Henry and Carducci and both of them get rotated in the same week. Well, then you're left without a keeper for that. So at least if you have both keepers from the same team, then you're guaranteed that start. Just knowing if you have that, that's 2 out of 3 Forge players that you've already taken up. So you're only getting 1 more playing outside of the field. Stay away from Zajac if he comes back. That's just, I find, and I don't know why he gets the playing time he does. I find he doesn't really contribute too much in the game, but it's starting to look like I don't think he'll be on the team upcoming. And 2 players that I actually think are decent players as far as the future goes, Mosin and Cella, but it was also talked about how they might not even be re-signed yet. I'm not sure, but they were there for a lot of just filling in those U21 minutes. Mosin actually got a decent amount of time because of injuries that happened and that they did need those U21 minutes so much. And they weren't horrible players by any means, but I just don't think they're players that are definitely on the radar for a fantasy team. I think there'll be better options out there. We might be forced to, if these are the kind of players that are priced in that, if they price it the same way they did last year in that 25K range, this might be a time where you might want them. But again, they're not players that will probably be part of the starting squad very often.
Yeah, I think when you're looking for the value, first of all, to just confirm, Cella not re-signed yet. Mosin is re-signed. He looked pretty good last year at the Island Games. Came in for some decent minutes. If I recall, he played multiple different positions too, so that's valuable. But like you said, I think even from last year in the Island Games, I think when you're looking for value in terms of fantasy, you're trying to find those young players who are breaking in. And on this Forge team, that's just not a real easy thing to do. It's the 2-time champions, right? And they're solid in every part, every position on the pitch. I would probably look elsewhere. Obviously, we're Forge focused today, but I would probably look elsewhere to get those real value picks in terms of fantasy.
Can you either confirm or deny the fact that Mosin and Cella are still 21, or would they count over that total? Do you know that answer or no?
Not off the top of my head. That will be an answer for another show.
Okay, I just don't know if they need new U21 players now, and if that's really what they're looking at, or if these ones can still fit the bill.
Right.
All right. And so that is going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you watched all the way here, this is definitely by a long shot my longest video that I've done compared to everything last season. I'll obviously still be doing my solo videos going over the team. I think at least one more time. We already have planned one more for Peter to come back. Thank you very much for your expertise in the Canada soccer world, adding into it. And you had some good takes even from the fantasy side there. So I have a good feeling you'll do better than you did last year. I think you came like what, mid-table kind of last year?
Yeah, I had a slow start last year, and then I started getting the hang of it, and I picked it up towards the end, but it was too late. So yeah, hopefully through this video I'll be able to get more tips, and it'll help me.
And at least it's a 28 game season. Falling behind at the start doesn't mean that you're going to sit behind the 8 ball the entire time. It's a long time to catch up. Yep. Hopefully we get some news that the actual site will be opening up soon and we can start tinkering with our teams. And let me know if there's any videos that you want me to do before the end of, before the season starts. We already have an idea of picking a few players from different teams in order to showcase. Last question. You have picked 3 players from Forge. Money is not an option. Which 3 are you going with?
Not an option. Well, I think
money is like no question. You can pick any 3.
Yeah, the value, I think you have to build any fantasy team. I think just like any real team, you got to go through the spine of your team, right? So I think Henry is a value pick in terms of fantasy. He's like we said, he's there for a bumble or 2 once in a while, but he's going to be on one of the best teams in the league and pick up wins and potentially clean sheets. So that's invaluable. Personally, I know this might not be the popular pick. I would take Crutzen. I think even though he's a defender, he takes set pieces. He gets forward. He scores goals. He's always there. You get the clean sheet option from him. I think Crutzen's huge value.
He would be my first pick out of all of them, I'd say.
Yeah, huge value in fantasy. And then the third pick's tough because, like you said, Kyle Becker's always going to be there and he's always going to be valuable, but it's hard to not pick a more attack-minded player. Personally, I think Tristan Borges is coming into this season with something to prove to get back to Europe. I would take him. I think he's going to provide a lot of fantasy value as well.
All right. Well, thanks for your time. We're going to end it there. Please click the subscribe and like button if you enjoyed it. And I hope you keep coming back to see more videos in the upcoming future. Take care.